Good afternoon, everyone. So I hope you've enjoyed your networking break. My name is Jan Ellermann. I'm the Senior Specialist in Europol's Data Protection Function. And I have the particular honor to moderate this first actual panel after the inspiring keynotes we've all enjoyed this afternoon. Before I invite the distinguished panelists on stage, I just wanted to give you a small introductory session on how Eden panels actually work. So how we make this happen is basically each panelist has about 10 minutes plus minus to shoot out some core statements. If the panelists want, they can use slides. If they don't like slides at all, they can also skip slides. And afterwards, we're going to enter into a moderated talk. And then my goal will be to also involve you guys as much as possible, because that's the difference with the keynotes. With the keynotes, let's say everybody is a bit shy to ask questions or to challenge statements made on stage here. For the panels, it's a completely different ballgame. So I can feel the energy in the room already. So I can feel there are a lot of questions out there, and I can feel how you're going to engage. And of course, you're going to do that for a reason. So whoever takes the mic, at least as long as I have some, will get this memorable t-shirt here. So you're not here for nothing. So we have these beautiful Eden t-shirts for all the speakers. And I'm going to distribute them in random sizes. So that also means if you get one in S while you are super big, that means you have a task, because you will have to find somebody who got a small one and is super big, no, the other way around. Well, we're going to figure it out together. With that, I invite the distinguished panelists also to join me here on stage. Don't be shy. Maybe a small applause already for the panelists. Yeah. So you will also have noted the difference in the stage setting as compared to the keynote. So we've arranged this a bit like a living room. And there's, of course, a logic behind that, because we want to create an atmosphere where we can really exchange views, where we can talk openly. So welcome to the Eden living room. When I prepared for this panel, I, of course, used AI. So I asked ChatGPT, what are the top 10 issues linked to surveillance? Informing ChatGPT, I have this law enforcement use of lawful surveillance technology panel. I don't have any time. I don't want to prepare myself. So ChatGPT, what are the 10 issues we need to cover? ChatGPT came up with the following. First, privacy invasion, erosion of personal privacy due to constant monitoring. Second, mass data collection, unregulated accumulation of vast amounts of personal data. Third, data security, risk of breaches or misuse of collected surveillance data. 4, lack of transparency, insufficient oversight of surveillance practices. 5, government overreach, potential for abuse of surveillance by authorities. 6, chilling effects, suppression of free speech and expression due to surveillance fears. 7, discrimination and bias, targeting vulnerable groups through biased surveillance tools. 8, technology misuse, misapplication of surveillance technology for unethical purposes. 9, legal ambiguities, gaps in laws governing new surveillance technologies. And then 10, AI and automation risks, potential for errors or biases in automated surveillance systems. Not so bad. On the other hand, we see AI is not perfect, so there was some duplication in there. You guys can feel the pressure, because we need to answer all these questions, you in just 10 minutes. So I welcome on stage here Professor Caroline Lequesne. Caroline is a professor, lecturer in public law at the University of Côte d'Azur. You're a member of various research groups. The French Data Protection Authority, basically in collaboration with the Ministry of Interior, appointed you to review surveillance technologies during the Olympics in Paris. So we are very much looking forward to your contribution. So the stage is yours. Thank you.
So ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, dear colleagues, I would like to thank the organizer for the invitation. It's a real honor to be with you this afternoon. So I'd like to introduce this talk with a short video. This is the trailer for an award-winning report about data surveillance state in China.
我的丈夫是一个律师，被警方逮捕了，说他颠覆国家政权，因为他们是相当于是像访民啊，然后你爸又去给他们辩护。
我国的天网工程安装的有1.7亿台摄像头，是世界上最大的视频监控网络。
在它的一个大数据的这个系统，再加上地面的这些，完全就是有些人可以去通过这种方式来实现对人民的一种控制。
去找我的邻居嘛，散布谣言，说我是卖国贼。
因为北平这个案子不是一时半会儿能解决，那时候怎么办？你自己要想想，万一有这个时刻。
你觉得有必要问这些吗？
他们可能就是一群比较特殊的人群，有过类似的行为。
公安民警执勤期间是禁止私人拍照、录像的，对不对？
矢量工程就是我国为推进平安法治建设实施的重大民生工程。
然后端来做这个逃犯以及黑名单布控，
在这个 APP 上，我们还可以看到自己的一个排名，也是给居民营造了一个比学赶超的一个氛围。这个实现对家人呐、或者说孩子以后升学。
这是我爸爸的所在地范县看守所。
这个周末到现在，我们总共写了52份控告信。
有时候睡觉的时候，可能做梦会有一种压抑感，就是很压抑，想出去，大声喊也没有人听。
So I know it might seem a bit provocative to start the first panel of this conference with a documentary on data surveillance state in China. I can see you thinking, this is not what we are doing. We are not China. And yes, absolutely, we are not China. And this is precisely why this documentary matters. China urges us as a democracy, as democracies in Europe, to think deeply about the use of surveillance technology by law enforcement authorities. And there is at least two questions raised by the China model. First, to what extent should we allow and develop this surveillance technology that obviously threaten our fundamental rights? We have to keep in mind the perspective of the slippery slope. The recent debate over the introduction of lethal drones in the United States is a good example of this. While a number of surveillance tools have already been normalized over the past decade, the boundaries continue to be pursued further in the name of security. Second, we have to keep in mind that China does not operate in a vacuum. We share the same world. As this studies indicates, even if United States is still the leader of AI in the AI global market, China is now leading the surveillance technology one. And this is not a small matter, because China is shaping this market and also its standards. And we must consider how Europe positions itself in response to this dynamic. And all this leads to the question, what does the European model stand for? So I'm Caroline Lequen. I'm a law professor in the south of France. And over the past 5 years, my research focused extensively on crowd surveillance. And I propose to use this area to provide some initial insights to those questions. But to outline the European, or what should be the European model, it's crucial to understand where we come from. In 2019, technological, digital progress, advancement, and particularly in facial recognition, have generated expectation and demand from the authorities. However, the legal environment, including the exemption provided by the Police Enforcement Directive, was not suited to meet that demand, and did not allow, and still does not allow, the deployment of this technology in the publicly accessible spaces. In the public, the deployment of facial recognition was especially contested on the ground on fundamental rights, given the use of biometric data. So this legal uncertainty led to under-the-radar experiments. And I have to say that as a researcher, it's been quite challenging to catalogue these experiments over the years, and often sparked public distrust. The response to that situation was twofold. First, a repositioning of the industry, of the AI industry, toward AI video surveillance instead of only facial recognition. And second, the adoption of a pivotal piece of legislation that we have already been talking about a lot today, the Artificial Intelligence Act. So this landmark text was adopted after 3 years of intense work and debate over surveillance technology, as the member states, the Council, and the European Parliament didn't share a common view on the subject. As the Council, the member states, was in favor of broad exemption, the European Parliament advocated for prohibitions. So at the end, and in a nutshell, let's say, the compromise resulted in 3 key measures. First, some prohibition of certain uses, such as predictive policing based solely on AI profiling, biometric categorization, that AI system, and interdiction of AI system to infer sensitive personal traits, AI system for real-time remote biometric identification in publicly accessible spaces for law enforcement purpose. That was the first step. The second step was the implementation of an authorization regime granted by judicial authority or an independent administrative authority. And the third element was the requirement that all of the system be subject to high-risk AI framework as far as crowd surveillance are concerned. So those are the European red lines. For all systems, pre-authorization is required, and all obligations associated with high-risk system must be met. So now where we are going. These are important points, yet they are far from addressing all the challenges posed, especially the democratic challenges. The third challenge is the operationalization of this legislation and of human rights, along with establishing an accountability regime that will be relevant for both democracy and operational the field. France provides an interesting example here, as the French legislator anticipated the adoption of the AI Act by enacting a law that allows to deploy and to experiment some of AI system for crowd surveillance during big events and also during the Olympics. So this legislation faced criticism, and it's far from perfect. But yet some standout action include oversight and evaluation by an independent commission, along with some comprehensive measures designed to protect fundamental rights. So it's still too early to assess these experiments, but the feedback of these will be extremely important, as it will shape future model in our framework. Second challenge is this one. We face the ongoing problem of blind spot of the law and practical challenges tied to current practices. A concerning case, even worrying case, is the Clearview AI Company 1. We all know that police departments worldwide use this New York-based company technology, which has gathered the world's largest biometric database. And despite the sanction from the different European data protection authorities, it continues to flourish under the radar. So as a conclusion, at this moment, we found ourselves in the midway somehow. We need to think through the operationalization of this principle. We must establish a robust accountability regime, and it's crucial that even with the adoption of the AI Act, we do not let our efforts against the backdrop of a global competition. As the open documentary underscored, the stakes are significant, and it's trivial to say, but so important to remind that it's about preserving our fundamental rights and what define as European our uniqueness, the commitment to integrating surveillance technology within a democratic framework. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Caroline, for setting the scene so nicely and with a critical perspective. So I think what we see with this documentary, Total Trust, is that unregulated mass surveillance is no longer 1984-like dystopia. It happens just at the other end of the world. And the question you've raised, rightfully, I believe, is does this mean can we lean back comfortably here in the EU? And interestingly, I did some research, and the director of Total Trust, Jialing Zhang, he was asked the same question. So it's all on China, but how do you see the rest of the world? And then interestingly, his response was indeed, well, Olympic Games. I think the example which you also introduced is something which worried him as well. You referred to your research basically in your focus on crowd surveillance and facial recognition here, which is contested in the public areas. And this is also something which we see back and saw back then in the Artificial Intelligence Act, where I found it interesting that you emphasized, okay, the council was basically in favor of even broader permissions for law enforcement, whereas the European Parliament then pushed for more prohibitions here. I think the conclusion or the outcome is now that mass and indiscriminate surveillance are to be banned. I think that is, let's say, the essence of the Artificial Intelligence Act. And then maybe also something where we can say this is a difference to China as we have seen it in this documentary, in this impressive documentary. I've watched it myself. For those who haven't, I can strongly recommend that. But then also taking us to the Olympic Games as a test ground for algorithms. That's, of course, also something really interesting, which I think takes us nicely to the next speaker, Olivier Corneilly, who's Deputy Director of Operations within the Directorate of Special Units of the Belgian Police. And at the same time, Olivier is also the chairman of the European Surveillance Group. And basically, when we entered into an exchange first, we had a chat, and Olivier was a bit like, okay, this is a data protection experts group, so are you sure I'm the right person for that audience? And I said, Olivier, yes, definitely, because what you can bring to the table is really the perspective of the operational practitioner in the field, and that is needed. I think also for all of us who are, let's say, members of the data protection community, if that exists, it's good to have you here and take us as deep as you can into your operational reality for an informed debate. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jan, and thanks for this kind of introduction indeed. It's a real pleasure to be here today with you, but it was a big surprise for me when we started, when I received the first invitation asking me to be there today in such a group, because my expertise is not what you do, it's not what you are expert in. I'm really expert in surveillance indeed, and we spoke about surveillance now, but in a different way, and that's what I will try to explain you. I will probably disclose, not that much, disclose some small techniques. Maybe it's kind of teaser. There was a beautiful video of surveillance in China. It will be part of my presentation too. I will not put the video back, but you've seen it, so it's good to have this kind of introduction too. But there will be another video of what we do really on the field today. It's out of the AI, out of the mass video surveillance, but that will be part of my presentation. So thanks for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be there. It's a big surprise for me first. I hope it will not be a too big surprise for you. So like Jan mentioned, I have two positions, one in the Belgian police. It's my daily business, my main business. And above this, I'm also chair of a European group, which is the European Surveillance Group. I will give you a few words about this one a bit later. But I will start speaking about surveillance, because surveillance is really my daily job. In a managing position nowadays, but I have been a field officer also. So I can emphasize my explanation on this probably. But speaking about, and I already introduced that, speaking about two kinds of surveillance. What Karin mentioned, and I'm just, you know, I'm not technical, not technicians, really, not specialist. I found it good. So what you saw in the video about China is a massive surveillance, something really trying to get as much intelligence as possible, try to find deviant behaviors within the population, try to systematically put everyone under surveillance control, to have a part of control on this. It's practically something happening in China. It's not a European way of doing, of course, but we can have a lot of fear that it's going to Europe, but we understood it's not the way we want to go, but something existing. Technically, it's really possible. And I would say, looking, as I mentioned on slide, speaking about intelligence gathering, I think if we want to prevent some very, very terrific act like terrorism and so on, it can be part of the game, not having this kind of surveillance, but a part of this. And I think the balance is really, we have to decide where we have to put the balance on this one. What will we accept to do? What do we accept as civilian, but also I'm also a policeman, and that's also something important. What do we want to put the cursor? What do we accept as balance in this one? So the video of Total Trust is certainly something interesting. We don't have to do it again. I think it's already done. It's going further. What I'm doing on daily basis, what I've done, I'm managing today, is another aspect. It's more the gathering of information, of course, but not only incriminating, but also exonerating some people which are suspect of doing very, very bad things. This kind of surveillance is more an individual surveillance. It's no more massive surveillance, and most of the time is subject to approval by judicial authorities. And I think it's also part of the balance we want to to put on this system. We start with the video. I'll try to give you another one, if it's working. I hope so. It is. Don't pay attention to the language, just speaking French and Dutch. So, just a general briefing of the team.
Wij draaien vandaag een dossier P. Diane. C'est un dossier de trafic d'armes pour le PJF de Bruxelles. Onze target voor vandaag is Kort Dirk. Dirk devrait avoir un contact dans le courant de la soirée. On ne sait pas encore où ni avec qui. Donc on va faire un pick-up autour de son adresse.
So welcome in my world. This is where that's what I was doing. It's still what I'm leading today. So we are not speaking about systematic surveillance. We are not speaking about mass surveillance. We are speaking about individual surveillance, targeting some people which are under warrant of or search for one of the things. I was saying ESG, the European Surveillance Group, just a few words about this one too. It's well a European expert groups. So forum for observations teams that want to improve their collaboration between all the countries of the European country. We try to improve the procedure we are applying between us just to make us better and to have a better collaboration, to be better also in the field of surveillance. It's a recognized expert group by Europe on physical and technical surveillance of individual persons involved in legal cases. So you know already you know what I do. When you speak about, I mentioned data protection, data collection, which is your subject, your expertise, not mine. What I will say today is my personal opinion. It's not, you can start as a reference. It's well my personal opinion as law enforcement officer, sharing a lot of information with other observations teams and so on and so on. So please consider this as my personal opinion. The first thing is, well, just like I mentioned you, surveillance can be seen by different point of view. Looking the same thing, we have different approach. At the one side, the individual surveillance, at the other side, the massive surveillance. And that's also the job of surveillance guy. Looking to surveillance at the tools available. We mentioned AI, we can mention a lot of technical things. An operator has to work on the field discreetly, kind of undercover guy. And as a result of his job, he's using also different application. You are using as civilian also, meaning that you can leave some traces. You can be traced by other people. Even if you are law enforcement officers, we can be traced by other people. It can be other law officers. It can be a lot of civilian also. It can be companies. And it can be a lack in the security of our people. So with this kind of point of view, saying that managing the work on the field between covert and overt, it can be a difficult position to apply. And this kind of reflection, probably you will find a lot of police officer being a lot of surveillance officer, I would say, being defender of total, I would say, total privacy. I don't want to be fined somewhere. Looking to the security of my personnel, I don't want to trace them. I don't want to identify them. You will find no surveillance officer except me now on the field to be seen by all the people. I just mentioned they are working covertly most of the time. Anonymity is really an important thing for their security. They are working very, very close by big criminals. They are working very, very close by criminal organizations. The anonymity is really a very, very big issue for us. So we are using different systems. You are using different applications. You are using on daily business too. And we don't want to disclose our identity. So we would be a big defenders. We would be big defenders of privacy, rejecting any collection of information, trying to gather information about us, what we do. But at the other hand, a lot of police officers also not only law enforcement officers, but are investigators, and they have a need for information. Just mentioning in this role, it's quite important for them to have access to a lot of data, to have access to find out what the bad guys are doing, trying to track the habits of the bad guys, the meeting points, all kind of traces they are living on social medias or internet. So open source intelligence is therefore an essential tool for the job of an investigator. You will understand that in this hypothesis, the operator will defend the need to collect and exploit mass surveillance information in search of information about the bad guys, about the appointed targets. I regularly hear the debate around privacy in our Western society, and speaking about the right or not to retain data left by any citizen on the internet, on social networks, and so on and so on. It seems to me, as a police officer, that the axis of decision is wrongly positioned. From my point of view, and from a Western approach to the phenomenon, the problem lies less with the retention of information than with the use of available data. It seems to me very essential to make a distinction between both. Retention on one side, investigation on the other side. To want to deprive the police of a considerable source of information is to reduce their power to act in the face of abject phenomena. Take the example of child kidnappings, of a worrying missing person case, a rape in public place. It goes without saying that the police will examine the telephone data around the area of the act of the crime. If we, we need this kind of information to cross-check with all the data is available, to try to trace the bad guys, to try to find out who he is, and where is he. To deprive oneself of such resource in the name of privacy is for me an unfounded argument. I fully understand and defend our society's need for privacy. However, in my own opinion, the measure to be taken should not limit the retention of information, but the exploitation of that information. I think it's a reasonable thing to set up processes for controlling and authorizing the use of such data. Not everyone, including the companies collecting the information, should be allowed free access to this kind of information. Such access must be subject to review and authorization by independent body. In all Western societies, this filter is generally provided by judicial authorities. I remember my university lecturers a long time ago, for sure. I need glasses today. Our democracies are characterized by the exercise of three major independent powers: legislative, the lawmakers, the executive power, and the judicial authorities. Those powers must operate independently to guarantee our democratic rights. This is probably where the greatest threat currently lies. Some leaders are inclined to want to supplant the executive above the other powers for the purpose of efficiency or rationalization. I'm convinced that our democratic models and our individual freedoms can only be guaranteed by a permanent balance between the three major pillars of our society: legislative, executive, and judicial authorities. On the other hand, the role of criminal or terrorist organizations cannot be overlooked in influencing this balance. In recent years, major cases such as SkyUCC and Crochet have been brought to public attention, demonstrating the attempt at influencing from the bad guys. Corruption is no longer the preserve of distant societies. Increasingly, lucrative criminal organizations are seeking to influence certain key positions in order to facilitate their activities. The plurality of powers in place in our democracy and the independence of the three main pillars should make our society more resilient. In a nutshell, the purpose of our presentation was to focus your attention on different kinds of surveillance and the existence of the European Surveillance Group, the distinctions between data retention and data exploitation, the importance of the two concepts in the debate on privacy, the need for checks and balances in the exercise of intrusive powers, the essential but precarious balance between the three powers of our society, the pillars of our modern democracies, the potential of threats to them and therefore to our fundamental rights. Thanks for your attention. And don't forget,
Thank you so much, Olivier. I loved your introduction of the topic. I'm a policeman, but I'm also a civilian. So how much surveillance do we ultimately want to accept as a society? And then, of course, also your spin to say, well, there's mass surveillance on the one hand, but there's what we do, what you do, you frame as individual surveillance authorized by a judge. Thank you also for your elaborations on the European Surveillance Group, which I understand is really a practitioners network on physical and technical surveillance. And last but not least, also thank you for your honesty. I mean, you've stressed on numerous occasions, this is your personal opinion regarding data protection. But it also takes a bit of brevity to come to a data protection conference and to say, well, this is how I see it. Interesting though, you are a data protection believer, in particular when it comes to the personal data of covert investigators. And that is something which is interesting because we frame that as Europol as administrative data protection. So that is the personal data protection of all our stuff. And there, I think we have a close match between the real investigators, the really operational guys, and the data protection community. But then also your openness. I heard a clear plea here for data retention as such. So that was, for those of you who already heard the keynotes, I think a nice link to the keynote we've heard earlier from Olivier Onidi from the Commission. You basically advocate for safeguards at the level of access to data, but you want the data to be retained in the first place. And I would just like to share a very small anecdote here. Back in 2018, we were organizing workshops on the data retention file here at Eurojust because our ambition as data protection function of Europol was to have all the experts in a room and to determine how we could best address all these criteria put up by the European Court of Justice. So to reduce the amount of data which would have to be retained in the first place. And I have to say you had some good company in those times already, because it came to a moment where we discussed there is a technical value which records the number of times a telephone rings, even when the line is not being picked up. And we, as members of the data protection function, we said, come on guys, that we can get rid of. We don't need that data, do we? And then a flag went up. I'm not going to reveal which flag here. And that colleague said, no. We definitely need those data because the mafia communicates that way. So they have a kind of Morse code and they use the number of times a telephone rings to convey certain messages. Well, this is where I then was confident that at least the length of the antenna of the signal, that was another technical value. We could all agree that we can get rid of that, but you already sense it was a difficult discussion already back then. You also make reference to Sky ECC and EncroChat. That's a topic which I'm sure is also close to the heart of the next speaker. Let me introduce you to Jean-Philippe Lecouf, our Deputy Executive Director of Europol's Operations Directorate. Mr. Lecouf is a member of the French National Gendarmerie with increasing responsibility within this institution, reaching the rank of Lieutenant General and now General shortly before joining Europol, and most recently promoted also to General. So, Mr. General, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jan. Not sure it was useful to mention all this, but so law enforcement use of lawful surveillance technology. When seeing this title, I was thinking what I'm going to tell them. And well, I decided to drive you through a theoretical but operational case that we can have in Europol. And to put you a bit in the context, I have a short video.
Around 9:25, gunmen with Kalashnikov-type assault weapons targeted diners at a string of restaurants. First at Le Carillon and Le Petit Cambodge. 15 people were killed. The gunman raced away in a black car. Next, the Café Bombière was hit. 5 people were killed.
So, you recognize the terrorist attack in France, in Paris, and in Brussels in 2015. You would say it's an easy introduction, but it's also at the core of what we are doing here at Europol. And we have recent attacks like this one happening not every week, but quite often, not that size, but as law enforcement, so it is important for us to prevent this attack, but also when it unfortunately takes place, to find the suspect as soon as possible, and this to prevent any further incident. And here comes the power of data. The power of data that I will try to show you, but also the power of data protection that I will try to show you as we do it here in Europol. Well, you have understood that telephone mass data is a big data, but a data that can be useful in the situation you have seen on the screen. Everybody knows about what a cell tower is collecting data on a permanent basis for every time your phone connects to a nearby telephone mast, to make a call, to connect your mobile internet, or to a nearby telephone, and so on. This data reveals in real time your location, your travel pattern, the frequency of activities, but not only yours, mine also. But we can unravel a lot of your private life via this cell tower data. And it's an example that I took because today, these data are often used to assess a mobility pattern when they are anonymized, to solve traffic problems, but also, and I'm sure that you don't even know when your data are used to do that. And sometimes, even if you have not agreed, your data can be sent to Europol. How? Your data can be lawfully collected in a member state by a law enforcement agency under a judicial authority, a judicial warrant. And then these data can be sent to Europol. We don't collect the data at Europol. It's not in our powers. It's only the member states that can do that under judicial scrutiny. Why? Because as shown in the video, when there's a major terrorist attack or big criminal incident, the cell tower data is collected by the, as I was saying, by the national law enforcement and always under the supervision of judicial authorities. And for Europol, as the criminal information hub, we hold this data and it is our duty as a law enforcement agency to embrace the opportunity to use this data to find the criminals, but also to protect the citizens and to prevent things, dramatic things to happen or criminal things. How do we do that? Are we allowed to do it? Yes, we are. We, as Europol, we have a unique legal framework to process large data sets. On the 1st of July 2022, our mandate was reinforced. A new amended Europol regulation entered into force, which defines exactly how we can support the member states and set clear rules on processing large and complex data sets. There has been a lot of discussion in the member states, in the council, in the commission first, in the council, and in the parliament to have this new legal framework in Europol. These changes to Europol regulation also came with a reinforced data protection supervision and new powers for the European Data Protection Supervisor, but also with a stronger parliamentary oversight on Europol and accountability. Europol always acts in support of a country, and it is the country that is collecting the data. I said that in previously, and I say it again. Our role is here to help the country to make sense of the data, to analyze the data, to help them identify lines of investigation to follow, and to ultimately help identifying those responsible for the crime committed and prevent them from doing any further harm. And we can, in this framework, and it's new in our regulation, use artificial intelligence. Any artificial intelligence tool that we use to do that has to have the prior approval by the European Data Protection Supervisor, what we call prior consultation. It's Article 39 of our legal framework. So meaning that we cannot do things without the approval of EDPS, and we cannot develop AI tools without use this AI tool before it was approved by the EDPS, which is a very important thing. It has been said at the beginning of the afternoon by our executive director, but also by the president of Slovenia. Europol has a long data protection history. Even before the GDPR, we had a data protection officer here in this house to safeguard personal data and protecting the rights of the citizen. In an efficient and effective data protection has long represented the foundation for the successful delivery of our mission, and I will come back to that. later. So with our strengthened mandate came even further strengthened data protection measures. I will drive you through some of these requirements that we have. Does function creeps exist, where the use of data is widened beyond the purpose for which it was originally intended? The answer is no. We only process data for a specific purpose, such as for operational or strategic analysis. Is the data stored together with criminal data, your data coming from the interception of this telephone? No. The data is functionally separated so that it does not mix with another data that we hold. Can anyone access Europol data? No. We follow a need-to-know principle, and we have a strict data access policy limiting the access of the data to some individuals that are in charge of doing this operational analysis. Do we keep the data after we have stopped using it? No, again. There is a limited retention period. We only process data when it is strictly necessary and proportionate. And as soon as this is no longer the case, we cease our processing activities. And we also are monitoring continuously through an enhanced data review mechanism with increased reviews, and we minimize the data, keeping only the data with a clear link to the criminal or the terrorist act. So, staying with the example of the telephone mass data lawfully collected by a member state following a terrorist attack, for example, and then provided to Europol, we would only work on it for the purpose it was provided to us, such as operational analysis. We would keep it separately for any other data, and we would only be accessed by those working on the data who have been given specific access right following a training to work on this data. And data minimization would be conducted, and the data and the processing activity conducted will be continuously monitored and reviewed with the help of our data protection officer and the data protection function. And once the case comes to an end, all processing activities on the data would cease. And this is what EDPS, the European Data Protection Supervisor, is checking on a regular basis every year, multiple times during the year. They come here, we open the files, we sit together, and they do that. What is the conclusion that I wanted to draw from that? To answer maybe some of your potential current thoughts. Will your data be ever ending up in one of the reports on crime if it is not linked to crime or terrorism? No. Will your data be deleted after some time? Yes. Will your data be used for any other purposes? No. As the use of lawful surveillance technology, in which your personal data was included, saved lives and people? Yes, it can. So we at Europol, we use the data, as you have understood, under a strict legal framework, but also under an ethical and data compliant way to protect and to uplift the security of each of our citizens. Why are we doing that? Because it's the law. No, not only. Because it's the basis of the trust that the citizen can have in law enforcement. Without the trust of the citizens, without the trust of the European Parliament, of the stakeholders, of the member states, we cannot accomplish our mission, that is to protect the EU citizen. And I was really struck because at the beginning of the afternoon, if you heard about the speech of our executive director, but also about the President of the Republic of Slovenia, trust was at the core of her speech. And we didn't adjust ourselves. I didn't adjust with the President of Slovenia before. But it's just because it's the truth. Trust is really the core value that we want to keep at Europol, and we make all our efforts in order that all the people can trust us when we are doing our job. And it's why we are so, let's say, we try to be so on the point on all of these things. And maybe a last thing, we want to get the trust from the citizen, but related to the first video that Caroline showed, we don't want the total trust. The total trust is for the Chinese. We want the trust, we want to be supervised, we want to be challenged, and I can tell you that we are challenged by EDPS. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean-Philippe. So I believe after the academic perspective and the field perspective, that was an honest account of how you see things here at Europol. In particular, I liked your comparison between the power of data and then the power of data protection. And also the honesty to say, look, if you happen to be in Paris on the evening of the 13th of November 2015, for instance, because you were watching the friendly football match between Germany and France, which took place right that evening, the reality is you were in our database. Does that make you, provided you had your cell phone with you, does that make you a criminal? Probably not. Does it make you a witness? Well, maybe a witness who could tell us, I heard a loud bang and I thought it's fireworks, or I knew immediately it was a bomb. But was this data processing operation necessary in order to track down the terrorists? Yes, beyond any reasonable doubt it was. And this is where we saw then also an adjustment of our legal framework to accommodate for that, which is very important for the organization, I believe. With that, and sticking to my promise that we want you guys out there to take the floor. So who is in the mood? Who likes yellow? We had some criticism about the choice of color here. Yellow. Who wants yellow? So yellow? Yellow? Don't let me hang here. There's somebody, a yellow fan back there. So we need a microphone over there, and I keep the T-shirt for you. A green one. That's a good one from last year, indeed. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the great speeches. I don't need the T-shirt. I'm going to speak tomorrow, so I already have the T-shirt. Maybe I can ask to Caroline. Thank you so much for your presentation. And you kind of indicated the dangers of mass surveillance and also potential regulation by the AI Act, where part of that is going to prohibit it or at least subject it to strict scrutiny. And I'm wondering how this would relate to the European Court of Human Rights, who in certain judgments, for example, the Big Brother Watch case, had explicitly said mass surveillance is like a beneficial tool to our current Western democracies because it is necessary to combat terrorism. Do you see a conflict between those two legal regimes, or are they somehow in harmony? So thank you so much for your reflection.
So yes, thank you for your question, which is a difficult question, a tough question. Actually, I think the devil is the detail, and I think the European legislator was really gifted in order to shape the law so that it can be compliant with the European the European jurisprudence. So yes, so they prevent, on the principle, mass surveillance. So the exemption will allow some use of data, some use of facial recognition and that kind of systems in the crowd, especially. But the details, the condition, the overview that is on the text will allow, to my point of view, to be compliant with the European Court. But still, it will be interesting to see very concretely how the state will interpret these measures, how they put in place the guarantees. And I think the European Court will be very cautious and attentive to those points, because we saw with the jurisprudence that, for instance, the information of the public was not enough, that kind of things. But a total ban or not compliant thing, I think it's not the path.
Thank you very much. I see another raised hand back there, Oscar.
Yeah, also thank you from my side, sorry. Thank you from my side for the presentations. I would have a question to for all of you, because what I'm wondering, so we're talking about new novel technologies being used in a surveillance context, and there are many technologies that can potentially be used in a surveillance context. Now, what are your views on which technology to choose? It seems sometimes that as soon as the next hype train, to put it a bit provocatively, when that comes along, then we're jumping on the train and trying to use the technology. But then, for instance, when you look at passenger name records, PNR, you can argue very much that it is probably not particularly useful technology to do that. And so how would you then, from your different perspectives from academia to really the practice, argue that this technology, before you use it, is useful for doing your investigations?
So who of you? I see Jean-Philippe.
Yeah, well, I can start if you want to. Well, we have an innovation lab, as you may know, in Europol, to try to follow what are the trends in technology. And well, for sure, we are looking at everything. First, our first goal is to see the technology that can be used, or I would say abused, by the criminals. And for example, we have seen that artificial intelligence already, with some deep fakes and so on, are abused by the social engineering, are abused by criminals to refine, for example, very much their online frauds, deep fakes for child sexual abuse, and so on. So it's our first focus. Then we have also a focus on how can we use the technology to be more efficient, and on this side, well, for sure, artificial intelligence will be, but it's so big and so vast that it's difficult to say. We have a look also on quantum computing for the future, when we see a lot of potential risk, a lot of potential also opportunities for us to do our job even better, but with the safeguards, and it's where we have to invent this. I think one of the key technologies also in the future for us and to protect our fellow citizens will be, for example, biometrics. For me, everything that is linked with biometrics, even if it's high-sensitive technologies, but it will help a lot, because we have more and more identity theft, more and more abuse for example, again, AI, deepfake. You can copy the face of somebody with a. So I think the biometric elements will be really key. But maybe a last word. If I took an example on the telephone, mass data, nobody was really shocked. But the first time that we used these technologies, when the mobile phone came, it was a big concern also. So it's just because this technology is becoming, let's say, familiar to everybody that we can use it without too much question. But tomorrow, what it will be with the other technology is a question of concern.
Just a practical point of view. I don't think the discussion about the technology is really the good one. Just mention, and I'm referring to what I said, we don't have to frame anything. We have to use everything we can, but we have to have check and balances. That's the most important. Don't stop today saying we can't use this because this kind of technology, go further with it. But we have to have a good assessment, a good analysis of what we can and we can't, and certainly have other people, independent bodies, looking at what we are doing, saying if you are right or not. Don't stop the technology, we'll stop at the assessment.
And I think that your question also raised another problem that haven't been mentioned yet, is the pressure from the industry. We saw that during the negotiation of the AI Act, and I saw that on a regular basis with local authority and public procurement. And to that experience, I drew two lessons. First of all, we need authorities like Europol has the human skills, the human skills. And when we talk about local police and our daily police and law enforcement authorities, and also our cities, it's not the same story. And I think the authority needs to be a company with that kind of project and contract. In France, we are thinking about labelization or that kind of thing in order to help these authorities to find their marks in this big market. And also assessment is a key. Because what I saw is that at a very local level, we buy some new tools. It's fun, they want some new tools, but sometimes they don't even know how to use it, or the company is not available anymore when there are some problems, some security troubles. So this is also a very practical aspect,
challenge.
Yes, issue.
Yeah, I would just like if there's
a final word just on the technology is that I think the most important is not the technology, is the use case. And we should really look at how the technology can be used and to assess the use case and not the technology. We cannot push back any technology because it's a technology, we have to see the use cases.
So, and with that, I have one T-shirt collector here. So I definitely want to hear that question to also award my yellow T-shirt. The answers must be limited to one sentence. Good luck.
Okay, I'm actually just taking the floor because I love the yellow T-shirts, especially in the wrong size one. But
no,
seriously.
No, the lady here in the front, you get a T-shirt, Xavier.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I will not leave without a T-shirt.
No, but the question is already allocated, so, but I get you your T-shirt.
Okay, but can I ask a question? Or?
No, the question is here in the front, Xavier, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.
It's perfect, then no T-shirt will require.
You get your T-shirt.
My question was just regarding lawfulness of processing, because that's one of the core principles in both GDPR and LED. And you were talking about data retention and facial recognition. And then I come from Denmark. And in Denmark, our Minister of Justice has just allowed the police to use facial recognition without any legal basis, and our data retention law has also been questioned a lot. So how do you in Europol, when you get access to the data from Denmark or other countries, make sure that there is a lawfulness of processing when the data you get is not actually lawful collected? Yeah.
One sentence. Very difficult for us to assess the legal framework of each member state. If the data is sent to us under a judicial investigation and in a lawful way in the member state, we are assessing, making a second assessment, but it's very difficult for us to challenge the legal framework of a member state.
Good. With that, I'm afraid we still have the social event tonight, so I trust that the large majority of you guys is going to join. All other questions have to be answered tonight during the social event, so you're required to attend, I'm afraid. No, just kidding. You attend if you can. Thank you very much for the honest exchange. Thank you also for the active audience, and one warm applause for the panelists, please.